everyone just thank Professor Wolf for obviously spearheading the whole activity that happens here and things at Democracy at Work. So he deserves a huge round of applause. I work at ACT TV, and I keep hearing these stories. The only people that are socialists or interested in socialism are under 30, and this audience is here to tell you that that is not the case. So that's great. I'm happy to see that, and the work that he is doing is, we have audience from all across the world at my new place, and they are mostly young people because it is an internet thing, and they know Professor Wolf's work. They know Harriet's work. The work that's being done here is reaching like minds, not just across the nation, but across the world. So I'm very happy personally to be here and to be part of this today. And I'm always very happy to do any kind of work with Dr. Fraad because she has affected me very personally in terms of the way you talk about capitalism and how it hits the family, and the way you give the context for how basically it's not your fault. Capitalism is a structure in which we live that is oppressive, and a lot of things that happen to you are not your fault, as the mainstream media and the American dream ideology would have you believe. So for that, I thank you personally, and I'm very grateful for the work that you do. Did you want to say anything before we hop into the...
No, I just want to hop into the whole analysis because Jeffrey Epstein just personifies everything sick and awful in this society.
Mm-hmm. Feel free to clap and laugh. You can feel free.
No booing.
You can boo Epstein. Right.
Yes, only.
So we're gonna, we're gonna start with why the topic is personally compelling to each of us, because we did get together and think about this topic, and it became, for me, personally compelling after hearing Harriet talk about it in an interview on the radio program that I was hosting for WBAI. And everything from, I was going to say that I have a daughter, and so, of course, I'm concerned about the state of women's rights and how women are looked at. But I also have a mother who lived through being a woman in the world, in the workplace, raising a daughter, me and my sister, and how all of these different things have affected her. So just for the women in my life, and just the vile attitudes that these men who have participated with Epstein have, I cannot understand. And so just speaking with Harriet and getting a general understanding of what is this thought pattern that is out there that is so vile that and how does that affect not only interpersonal relations? Where do they get that from? Why would they want this? Why would they want young women to be
raped?
Raped, yeah. Exactly. So it's personally very compelling because I have a daughter I want to protect, and I have a mother I have compassion for around her desire to protect me, and and that kind of thing. And also I'm really interested in sort of the secret workings behind the scenes of power and the dynamics of power, and the way these two intertwine is just really fascinating.
And I got interested in this because it really does combine gender and class and capitalism and what it can do, and also our intelligence communities and how they collude with predators in order to get good tapes on people they want to smear. And so that these hundreds of girls were raped and abused. And as I read more and more about Jeffrey Epstein, it's like seeing a stick and it's a rat's tail and you keep pulling it out. It's an enormous beast that's being exposed here. So maybe I'll get started.
Yes, we have the evening broken up like this. So Harriet's going to talk about what happened. How did this happen? How could this possibly have happened? And then how does this relate to U.S. capitalism? And then we're going to open it up for questions at the end. So save the questions and comments, whatever, till the end, and we'll open up the floor.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Da-da-da-da. So those people who remember Jackie Gleason, because he used to say, and away we go, and then do a cartwheel and fall down. But in any case, I'm not doing that.
I do want to start with just thanking Harriet because of the deep dive that she has done to understand and bring all of this information together. And I was saying how I am not seeing this in different places of journalism.
Yeah.
Rolling Stone's not doing anything. The Intercept's not doing anything. Journalism outlets where you would expect some sort of deep dive and to bring all these things together, all these different pieces that Harriet has been able to bring together, because of her passion for the subject matter.
Right.
I really just want to point out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this case magnifies everything that's wrong with our capitalism, our vulture capitalism, the secrecy of our government and its intelligence services, male supremacy, and gender training in one fell swoop. And it's like a giant squid with tentacles sucking up all this disgusting stuff and moving on silently, all too silently through the ocean. So the tentacles here are sex abuse, shame, toxic masculinity, billionaires, their political flunkies, and their social, political, and legal enablers that move relentlessly forward in our society. Only now they are tempered. Me Too and Time's Up have tried to transfer the shame from women who've been abused onto their abusers, because blaming women for somehow having a female sexuality has been a technique to keep women down, to hold the shame that these men ought to claim. In France, balance ton porc is their Me Too, which is out your pig, a little more direct. At any rate, Jeffrey Epstein's case is naked sexual predation against young girls, barely pubescent women, and young women who are bought, traded, and sexually used by men in the 1% who serve them and who are in our halls of justice, in our prestigious universities like MIT and Harvard, and in our government. Now, what happened here? Where did Epstein get the power to abuse with such impunity is the question. How did he operate what he called the Lolita Express, his jet, which contained so many rich men who got a chance to rape young women on the plane, and then when they arrived at one of the islands that Epstein owns, which he called Slave Island for the occasion, where capitalists and their flunkies like Donald Trump, a frequent flyer on the Epstein Express, and Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz of Harvard. How did he amass the money for the kind of wealth to buy such a plane? His net worth is estimated at $550 million, a little more than $500 million. He owned, before he, quote, committed suicide.
Get to that part.
Yes.
That's one of my favorite parts of this.
Elegant mansions in New York City, an elegant apartment in Paris, in a beautiful section of Paris, an elegant mansion in Palm Beach, and an 1,000-acre farm and ranch in New Mexico, as well as 2 islands in the Virgin Islands. What did he do to get such wealth? It really was a mystery to me when I started out. Epstein grew up a working-class kid. He grew up in Coney Island, and however brilliant he was always a smarty, but he dropped out of college, and his super wealth was acquired through, quote, intelligence and super connections. The first of his connections was thanks to William Barr's father. Keep it in the family. where William Barr's father was the headmaster at Dalton, who gave Epstein a job as a teacher in high school when he hadn't even graduated from college yet. That's interesting. He was teaching mathematics. And Dalton School, you should know, is a highly prestigious prep school. It costs $51,350 to go there starting at kindergarten. And people who have the discretionary $51,350, which is about the median income in the United States, start their kid in kindergarten so that they can get a place later on. So Epstein had no college degree, and there he connected with the rich fathers of Dalton students, one of whom got him a job at Bear Stearns, and there he ingratiated himself with other wealthy investors. One of them is Leslie Wexner of L Brands, that owns Abercrombie and Fitch, that used to own Henry Bendel, that owns The Limited, that owns Victoria's Secret, and also much else.
Wait, I just want to pause. So the over-sexualized clothing industry, I mean, Abercrombie and Fitch used to have like naked young models standing out in the mall in front of...
Which was interesting because before Leslie Wexner owned it, it was a staid men's store where you went in and one of the service personnel would bring out the few jackets you'd like to have to choose from, and you'd buy it. It was a very elegant men's store, which then was transformed into a sexy place. At any rate, Wexner, for some reason, which we'll find out later, gave over his entire multi-billion-dollar financial wealth management to Epstein. And so that every transaction that Epstein made for Wexner, he got money. For example, in 1 year, from one fee alone, he made $200 million from Wexner. So that certainly helped him accumulate some money. Wexner also transferred to Epstein one of the most expensive mansions in the city. It was $56 million when it was transferred. Now it's $71 million. Now we have to understand that among that set, when you give a gift like that, you're transferring money for other reasons. They don't have relationships that aren't transactional. Even if you read the book by Wednesday Martin, very waspy name, about the primates of Park Avenue, it's called Park Avenue Primates, there's so much transactionality that mothers and women get paid by their wealthy 1% husbands for how they are in bed, how they get their kids, what private schools they can get their kids into, and so on. So that
I never liked the Upper East Side.
Lucky.
Now I know why.
But, among the super rich, to transfer a mansion is not just only a fun thing to do. Something was going on. Some money was being hidden through that transfer. And according to the New York Times, Epstein's clients included people like Glenn Dubin of Highbridge Capital Management, America's biggest hedge fund. By the way, he was seen in a compromising photo with a barely pubescent girl on the Orgy Island. Also, Leon Black, Chief Executive Officer at Global Financial Management, one of the biggest international marketing and management firms in the world, and Jess Staley, of whom there are also pictures, and who is now the CEO of Barclays Bank before he was a high-ranking member at Morgan Stanley. All of these men, once Epstein was caught, deny their close relationship with Epstein. They say that they only asked for financial advice. However, even after Epstein was apprehended in Florida, it turns out that Aaron Black and invested with Epstein, and his whole family, his children, joined the investment as well because they were close, and there are all sorts of close photos of them. And it is true, Epstein was a clever fellow and tax accountant. tax consultant. Is that enough to ingratiate himself to all those wealthy men, as well as Bill Clinton and Donald Trump and Prince Andrew of the royal family? What else is happening? Now, maybe his long-term, well-documented friendship with Donald Trump and his friendships with Bill Clinton suggests what else he had to offer. For instance, there are photographs of Trump and Epstein, who designated themselves the only two consultants for a large competition for a calendar girl. Interesting, all these young women and these two men. Actually, there were 28 women and these two men.
At Mar-a-Lago, yes.
At Mar-a-Lago. In another incident, a 13-year-old girl reported that Trump raped her in Epstein's Manhattan residence, and that Epstein raped her thereafter in the same residence. The girl brought a suit against Trump and Epstein, even though they told her they'd kill both of her parents if she ever told. This is after raping her. In November of 2016, the suit was supposed to be brought into the court, but the girl withdrew it because she got so many death threats. She was terrified. So
we don't hear much about that.
No, we don't.
I haven't heard of. No.
Bill Clinton and Epstein's close friendship is discussed in Rolling Stone, the New York Times, Vox, New York Magazine, and Business Insider. They all try to distance themselves from him once he's caught. Now, what's the basis of friendships with these wealthy and influential men? They don't just like each other. Friendships in that group don't have to do with finding one another compatible and fun. They're transactional. You give something, you get something else in return. That's how you win in the system. So they're relationships of mutual benefit. One benefit, of course, is that people like Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz, Clinton, and Trump regularly flew on the Lolita Express, where they got to rape girls in the air, and then when they landed as well.
It's hard to hear.
So he gave them these opportunities. But Juliana's question is very important. What's the big thrill in raping a child? What's in it for these guys? Well, here we have to look at adolescent men, and we have to look at gender dynamics in this country. Adolescent men are only endorsed by other boys and coaches for having one area where they're needy, and that's for sex. Those girls are not counseled to be needy for sex and are counseled not to accept men's needs, because men will then slut shame them afterwards. So they learn not to do that. Sex as a power play over these girls is well documented. At St. Paul's, there was a case where a woman pressed charges because on graduation, you're supposed to have sex with somebody, however unwilling, and a boy raped her. She was 15.
What is St. Paul's?
St. Paul's is a very prestigious boarding school for wealthy boys.
Funny, I didn't know about it.
And so that sex as a power play is a big deal. However, I also think on the humane level, boys' sexual needs are holding a whole raft of other needs that they're not supposed to show, like tenderness, needs for comfort, needs for physical connection, needs for emotional care, needs for understanding. There's a very interesting study that shows that 40% of high-end sex work doesn't involve intercourse, but being held for the whole night. But the pretext is to hire a prostitute so that you're a real man. Boys' sports like football, hockey, rugby, boxing do have physical connection, but it's violent. It's not the same thing.
There's no varsity hugging.
No. Boys are ashamed of their neediness because they're made ashamed. According to James Gilligan, who's an NYU psychiatry professor and nonetheless has a lot to say, and I quote, "Nothing shifts shame as thoroughly and effectively as overpowering someone and subjecting them to unwanted sexual activity." So these men are discharging their shame at being needy onto these young women. And in order to make it in those echelons, you really can't be tender. You have to be keen on winning, and winning means getting more for you. Porn culture often presents women as like candy to chew and spit out, not as thinking, sentient, emotional, intellectual beings. One of Epstein's partners in raping these girls referred to them as sexual snacks. So that these men hold a savage disregard for men, for women and girls. What's interesting is that recently, New York Appellate Court declared rape as a hate crime because you have to hate women in order to do that, which I think is a big step.
That's great.
So I think that one of the services Epstein provided was it gave wildly rich and powerful men a vehicle for an opportunity for transferring their sexual shame from adolescence onto these children. Now, what are the gender dynamics that make this so exciting in addition to boys being denied their tenderness? Well, one of them is that women's words are not counted. Larry Nassar, who abused at least 100 girls when he was the Olympic team doctor for gymnastics, was allowed to continue for 21 years before the girls were finally apprehended. Were finally listened and he was apprehended. That was 100 girls over 21 years. Bill Cosby had 85 women report that he abused them. But nothing happened until the Me Too and Time's Up movement allowed women's voices to be heard, and he was apprehended. This is everywhere. R. Kelly, the rock singer, kept a whole group of 13 and 14-year-old girls who he emotionally and sexually abused. And it took a long time for those girls to be believed. We have to understand that these men have divorced all compassion for these girls, as they do for most of their employees, I'm sure. And Nancy Charterow and Dorothy Dinnerstein really did good work on the gender dynamics. They weren't writing about this case because they wrote in the late 70s, but unfortunately, there's a lot that's going on that's similar. What Charterow said is that since the big figures in children's childhood are all women, boys have nobody to identify with. Girls can identify with these dominant women because early childhood is a matriarchy. And boys then develop a negative identity. I'm the not woman. I'm not them. I'm divorced from them. And in the communities with the greatest absence of present fathers, there's the greatest misogyny. Because the negative identity is the identity one has in order to be a boy. Dorothy Dinnerstein points out that in this matriarchy, which is early childhood education, where there are mothers that are women, daycare workers that are women, pediatric nurses and other nurses that are women, babysitters that are women. Little boys have their most needy, humiliating, and inept times of their lives at the hands of seemingly omnipotent women who they deeply resent. Girls have these powerful women to identify with, so whatever anger they have, they also have an identity. but boys don't. And they often hold this anger at having been humiliated as little boys. There's a kind of rage at the helplessness and neediness which is encouraged in our society, in which men are not allowed to be needy. Usually, even in daycare, it's condemned. Little boys don't say, "I need a hug." And by the time you're in sports, in grammar school, little boys are not encouraged to do girls' activities. If a boy wants to play with a doll in the classroom and then go outside and play jump rope, he's mocked as a loser and called faggot. If girls want to play boys' games, they're much more prestigious, so it's fine to want to do contact sports and want to do powerful things. So that there's a prestige ladder that kids learn as kids, where being female is not desirable, particularly in terms of males' interests in girls' activities. Dannerstein actually thinks that men's hatred for women won't disappear until men take an active role in little children's lives. And you can see that in other cultures that aren't ours. A country like Norway, in which men have to take their paternity leave so they can't get extra credit for going back to work early, and in which fathers and mothers get childcare leaves, family leaves, and so on, and where families get $6,000 with the birth of a child to help, and then family allowances till their kids are 18, then there's less pressure that one person has to go to work and it has to be the one who makes the bigger salary, which in our culture is a man. These things are very much part of American backwardness here. We are the only developed nation that doesn't have at least paid maternity leave. The other nations in the world that don't have paid maternity leave are Swaziland, Somalia, and Papua New Guinea. Wow. Not in developed nations company. So there's the other capitalist angle. In order to be a wealthy capitalist and try to get more out of your workers while giving them less and suspend your concern for them, you can't really be thinking of them as people. You have to dehumanize them, which is really actually psychologically sick. Jeffrey Bezos has $150 billion. His workers have periodic strikes because they can't stand the pace, and they hurt their backs, and they're physically and emotionally nervous at the pace to keep up at the low salaries they get. Meanwhile, Bezos is spending $100 million to get himself into outer space on his own rocket. So
I've heard that even in the warehouses, sometimes, like the pregnant women are expected
they're expected to function no matter what, or they could lose their job.
Some have lost babies.
Right, but they, in order to lose a job for which people are desperate. And so that what you're talking about is capitalism also encourages a lack of continuity with other human beings, not only women, but anyone. The Walton family, who own Walmart, is the richest family in the world, and they invest a lot of money in preventing unions for developing, preventing workers from connecting with each other to have better lives at Walmart and keeping salaries down. They even have a special desk at Walmart for employees to apply for food stamps because they pay so little. People need to have our government subsidize Walmart so that their workers can live. Whoa, that's really something. So Epstein and his rich buddies are enabled by capitalist privilege, by the lack of compassion that's involved in capitalism. Capitalism really just isn't nice. I mean, In nursery school, you learn you should share and all that. You don't learn he has a more expensive toy. Grab it, run, that get the kids to work for you and give them nothing or only half of your lunch. Because you're teaching people to be unkind, to suspend their compassion and their connected humanity with other people. And this is particularly true of women for the gender reasons that I mentioned earlier. So Epstein's cohort are really empowered by gender ideology, by their money, and by their idea that people are there to be used. Why has he gotten away with this, though? Why did the cover-up work for so long? Epstein's been at this for a long time. He got out of Palm Beach County Jail in 2009. 35 girls reported that they were trafficked and sexually abused. He served only 13 months in jail in a special cushy cell. He got 16 hours a day, 6 days a week off, where he could go to his private office with special guards paid to take him there, who just stayed out the door while he raped girls in his office. So what's up with that? How did that happen? Well, it happened because in Alexander Acosta's moment of honesty, he was asked, wait a minute, why did Epstein get such a sweetheart deal? If anybody else was accused of trafficking and sexually abusing several girls, he would be in jail a long time. He wouldn't be getting such a cushy sentence. Well, what he said was, don't ask me, this is above my pay grade. This is intelligence. This is about intelligence. He then stopped saying that and just said, I can't discuss it. So,
and his role at the time when he...
Yes, he was the cabinet minister for Trump on labor.
But at the time in Florida,
right?
When Epstein was convicted in Florida, what role did he?
He was the Attorney General of Florida.
Yeah, so he should know of this.
Of course he knew, but he said in his words, I was told to back off. Epstein was above my pay grade. I was told, you leave this alone. It belongs to intelligence. And that was in the Daily Beast. And it's also in other media if you want to look for it. Everything I say is corroborated. So, in addition, the government was willing to break the law. The victims were not told of this cushy deal. And the law is that the victims in any case have to be told what the sentence is. They weren't. They kept that a secret and broke the law. It's also been revealed in exhaustive research that Jeffrey Epstein was involved with Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, and US intelligence as well. There's a group of billionaires called the Mega Group that supported Epstein and was connected to Israeli intelligence, who funded Netanyahu, who have funds from US intelligence and from organized crime. The Mega Group explains how Epstein went from a working class kid with no money to a fortune of over $500 million when he had only one client on the books, one regular client, Leslie Wexner, who is a prominent member of the Mega Group, which gives Sheldon Adelson is also active on that, major Trump funder. Yikes. What Epstein's job was to provide tapes of these rich men raping girls, because in every room at Epstein's mansion, there's cameras installed that the men don't necessarily know about. Plus, after trafficking the girls to these various men, Epstein would ask them what were the particular things they wanted and liked. Excuse me, and those were kept in logs that he kept.
You dropped something.
Yeah, it was just a tissue. But
The plot thickens, right? The plot thickens here as we start
yeah,
to
that
see.
became very valuable information financially, because those tapes could be used against foreign visitors. Ehud Barak visited. I'm sure that was taped. Many others visited. They had something on so many people, including Trump and Prince Andrew, Alan Dershowitz of Harvard, and Clinton. He kept those tapes as blackmail and sold them to various intelligence agencies. He kept them in a safe hidden in his mansion. When the safe was exploded because the New York police broke in and with crowbars opened the heavy oak doors and exploded the safe, not only were those tapes revealed, but the logs that he kept on the sexual perversions and proclivities of the wealthy men and influential men that he related to. Not only, now those tapes, which are obviously very useful, disappeared. No one knows where they are. There was a fellow who did have some of them, but he also disappeared. And Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Epstein's primary enabler and his madam, she seems to have disappeared too. Her father, Robert Maxwell, disappeared as well. He had been an agent for the Mossad, and he started pressuring them because he also had a media empire, and he robbed the pensions of all his workers. And when it came to light, Robert Maxwell wanted the Mossad to make up for it. And so he mysteriously fell off his own yacht and was found.
Happens all the time.
Yeah, that's right.
So slippery.
Quite a while later in the ocean. There were 3 people who disappeared who had access to these tapes. They all got a mysterious quick form of cancer. Isn't that interesting? The flight logs that pilots have to keep of who flew the Lolita Express have also mainly disappeared, all gone. And Ghislaine Maxwell is said to be kept in safe houses in Israel. I don't know if that's true. The other things I know are true. But she's disappeared too, even though she had a mail drop in Florida until about 2 months ago. And she has American lawyers. Nobody can find her. Now, part of Acosta's deal, to get back to that, included a clause that there will be no further prosecutions. So they can't go after any of the people involved with this. That won't hold up. But that's very interesting as well. We should also say that although Ghislaine Maxwell, I think she got Jeffrey into some of these connections, although he was a British citizen, his funeral, which they had after they retrieved his body having fallen off his own yacht, his funeral was in Israel, attended by 6 serving and former heads of Israeli intelligence. And at his funeral, Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir eulogized that Robert Maxwell has done more for Israel than we can possibly say today. The scientist Sekel tried to sell Maxwell's private papers. He disappeared as well. So this is all very interesting because it's about American intelligence, it's about Israeli intelligence, and it's also about the crimes people can commit that are allowed, and the rich men who will all get off when they committed these crimes against these girls, provided by Epstein. There's another class dynamic which is important, which is that most of these girls were poor. A lot of them were homeless. They wanted money for school, which they were promised. They wanted money to get their art career launched. They just needed the money, so they agreed to give him massages for money, and then were raped and brought into this organization and filled with such shame at what they had been doing for money that they mainly just never even reported it, although the 35 people did.
Harriet, can I ask you
Please.
a question? I have a list. I have an ongoing. So do you believe that because all of these high-level individuals are involved here, that there is a sort of blood pact between them of silence? Or is it just Epstein against, Epstein making money off of, say, the Israeli Mossad or the Clintons? Or
they feel they can do what they want with impunity. They've got the money, and they can do what they want. And one of the things they want to do is transfer their shame onto these vulnerable children. And so they get a chance to do it. And I think they felt like, oh, fun. I don't think that they don't have the sense this is a human being. These girls are human, like them.
We spoke a little bit earlier about someone who potentially has tapes who is in Russia. Maybe you were going to get to that? Meaning
Well, that
Putin
is much less corroborated. Some of them are under Putin's control, ostensibly, but that is much less discussed. And so I didn't want to say anything unless I knew more about it. Mm-hmm. And that has been, much less discussed.
Doesn't that explain a lot? You just, I heard and we're going to take more questions and stuff at the end after Harriet finishes her presentation, but I just wanted to make sure that was.
I wanted to emphasize that in Epstein's case, it took a really valiant woman reporter to even expose this deal of Acosta's. Julie Brown, who didn't get any information, tracked down as many of those 36 girls as she could and got their stories and put them in the Miami Herald, and that's why it was exposed. Also, because the Me Too and Time's Up movement are present, women felt more empowered, and the stories got out. Now, the last part of this story is the interesting death of Jeffrey Epstein, which happened only 1 or 2 days after those tapes were discovered. There's a book about it called Dead Men Tell No Tales. And what they found was, very interestingly enough, here comes Attorney General Barr again. The prison where Epstein was contained, the Metropolitan Correction Center, is under Epstein's supervision. It's a federal prison. Epstein supposedly had a previous suicide attempt. The rules of the prisons are, if someone's had a suicide attempt, they have to have a cellmate for a long time afterwards so that they're never alone in their cell. For some reason, right before this killing, the roommate was put on another floor. Not only that, the mandatory video cameras in the cell were both broken. The video cameras outside the cell were not even submitted. They submitted those from a different floor. Isn't this interesting? The 2 people that were the guards were both asleep for the same 3 hours, and nobody did a toxicology report to figure out why they both fell asleep for 3 hours at the same time. Now, they were tired. One of them had worked 80 hours already that week. But why those 3 hours? The other was shifted from a different job. But those 3 hours, and they're the only people who've been charged here. The warden was moved quietly to another prison. But he was in charge of making sure the video cameras worked, of making sure the rules were followed, which they weren't. In addition, only one day on CBS did they have the report that screaming was happening from Epstein's cell around the time that Epstein ostensibly committed suicide. And the autopsy that was originally done wasn't released for days because the woman said, well, we're still not sure. This doesn't usually happen. Then they decided it was a suicide, but a later autopsy said the broken hyoid bone, which is up here, is much more frequent in strangulation. And the way Jeffrey Epstein ostensibly strangled himself was he tied a bed sheet around one of the bedposts and leaned forward, so it would be at the bottom of his throat, but the hyoid bone is at the top. The noose that they recovered had no blood on it, even though Jeffrey Epstein had dried blood on his neck. All of these things, plus the autopsy done by Epstein's brother, point to the fact that he was strangled.
I'm sorry. The autopsy was done by Epstein's brother?
No, Epstein's brother
he ordered
a different one.
Sorry,
But,
there was so much weirdness to this story that I wouldn't be surprised.
That they decided it was strangulation. However, all the newspapers are carrying that, New York Times and all the others, that he committed suicide. That really is not proven. And you wonder, why is any of this findable at all? Why, if you search, can you even find this dirt? Well, I think part of it is, again, Me Too, Time's Up, and all the people that they inspire that reveal sexual crimes, also courageous people like Alexandria Cortez, Ayanna Presley, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, and Bernie, are leading us to think you don't have to defer to these sexist, racist, disrespectful, plundering men in our government. Movements like Sunrise to save the planet from being raped, Don't Rape Mother Earth, they're standing up. The yellow vests, and this is international, the yellow vests in France, men and women, partly are declaring we will not bear the shame of poverty that has been enforced on us by those elites. We want a popular democracy for everyone. Times are changing. Women are often taking the lead and standing up for gender justice. And just within the past year, the protests have been extraordinary. 5 million women in Kerala, India, made a 385-mile human chain with outstretched arms to assert the demand for gender justice and equality. And the U.S. Women's March in 2018 was the biggest demonstration we've ever had in the United States, a little over 1 million people, men and women together, for women's equality. Or even the smaller actions, like Megan Rapinoe, stretching out her arms, I deserve this, we won, and demanding equality for the women soccer players. Men and women together are rejecting the secrecy, the shame of poverty inflicted by the elites. They're looking at the disgraceful behavior of these rich men and making them take their shame back. And really, it can't happen soon enough. And part of the reason we can stop it is we can look at what is going on here, because it really is a shame. The end.
Thank you. Thank you, Harriet. We're going to take some questions from the audience after I pepper you with a few of my own questions. What are your thoughts about the likelihood that more information will continue to be revealed and some of these people in power will continue to be, I'd like to hope to say they're going to be held to account, but none of them have thus far. But it certainly seems like this is a beyond the pale type of story that is like an international network of child molesting, raping people of power, rich men. How, as this starts to continue to leak out, what do you think may or may not happen?
Well, first place, because it's, quote, intelligence is involved, I don't know how much will leak out. The papers have already dropped the idea that Epstein was killed. It's always referred to as a suicide, except by Epstein's brother, Mark.
Not with people. Like regular human beings, of course they killed him.
That's right.
Yeah.
And regular people are thinking, of course, Bush was influential in bombing the World Trade Center. Of course. But what we're going to do about it is just beginning to happen in the United States, where people realize, no, this system doesn't need to be tweaked. It needs to be changed. And part of the reason that Bernie, in spite of the Democratic National Committee working so hard against him, is so popular. He was even popular. He was so popular on Fox TV that they'll never let him on again, because they put him on talking about Medicare for everyone, thinking that he'd be unpopular. They loved it.
And the viewership of Fox TV is all on Medicare.
Bernie people voted for Trump in part because they were sick of this corruption, the swamp, and they just wanted to shake things up, destroy the fucker. And now Bernie wants to shake things up in a positive way. And people are responding. What they'll do if the Democratic National Committee continues to knife him in the back, I really don't know. I think they'd probably rather have a candidate that would lose the election but not corporate money, like Buttigieg. Trump's followers are not going to vote for a gay guy who talks about his husband. They're just not there. They're going to vote for somebody who says, shake it up, in a sort of nihilistic rage, which people feel because they're disgusted by this, even if they don't know the particulars. And we'll see there is a right-wing populism around the world, but also there is a left-wing populism around the world. We don't read as much about it, but Portugal is run by a coalition of the Communist Party, the Green Party, and the Socialist Party with a progressive government. Ireland just voted in Sinn Féin, a socialist party, and the only party that ever called out incest as a shame on the Irish nation. They're much more progressive. And they tried the Obama routine in Ireland. They voted for a Pakistani who's also gay. We voted for Obama. It's different, it's brown, okay. But the politics were pretty much similar. And so people are looking for something else. And that is hopeful. Where it will go, we don't know.
Questions?
I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and I've been to MCC. It is a 19th century facility.
It is.
The light bulbs don't work. The heat doesn't work. The AC doesn't work. I don't know how shocking it is that their cameras are broken. But would you be open to the possibility that Epstein paid someone to help him or assist him in his own suicide?
It's possible, but I also think when you have a prime prisoner like Epstein and everything's still broken, like when they had El Chapo, I'm sure his cell wasn't as neglected, and they didn't have both guards asleep from El Chapo. So that, I think if you have a prime suspect, he was probably the star of Metropolitan Correction Center at that time. And so the quote, negligence was, though sometimes not remarkable for an ordinary prisoner, it's highly suspect for the star prisoner of the moment.
I mean, as a media critic myself, or a media person myself,
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. It's hard for me to think how the New York Times can, with a straight face, be like, he killed himself. and then expect us to believe anything else that's in the paper. Like, it just seems like,
Yeah.
they just think we're a bunch of morons. I mean, they're selling us a lot of stuff. This brings up another question. How, and I'll get to you in a sec, how, that Epstein is obviously not working in a vacuum. It seems oddly shocking that child trafficking is just like something that's been happening since the Franklin Bank and in the Catholic Church. And why the fuck is this happening? Excuse my French, but like how, it just blows my mind that child trafficking can have been going on for all of this time. And it's just now becoming exposed. I'm grateful it's becoming exposed, but it needs to come out more.
It does. That's right. And also, look, a lot of people, you can really see it in the Catholic Church. Those priests' sexual development was arrested at about 10 or 13 when they were supposed to become priests, If you become a priest, your mother automatically goes to heaven. So there's a lot of mothers who push their kids to be priests. One of the big reasons priests drop out is when their mother dies, actually. That's statistically right. But, where your sexual development is shamed, there was no rape on the island of Tahiti till the missionaries got there. Where your sexual development is shamed, where you're shamed as a person, where one gender is made superior, you're going to have predation. And if you want to victimize an innocent and vicariously give her the shame that you felt as a child, also, 38% of girls have been molested by the time they're 18. So you have a lot of boys, at least 10% of boys. And so that you have wanting to be the victimizer instead of the victim. You have that dynamic too. In order to escape that, you'd have to escape the victim-victimizer dynamic in the society.
Final thoughts you'd like to offer as you continue to follow this story?
Well, just that I did a lot of work to figure this stuff out because I was so intrigued and incensed. And it shouldn't be so hard to figure out, but you can see the operations of the secret services of the United States and other countries allowing horrific things to go on in order to operate. And it's horrible. And we should know about it because it's important for us to know. It's important to know what we're dealing with. And also, as someone who has been a radical for a long time, I used to think when I was in my 20s and working all the time as an organizer that people just had to understand. I was so naive about what we were up against. And I think one of the reasons that Americans are less active is because they know this is not just tweaked. This is a swamp, and it will take a lot to change it. And we should realize the scope of what's going on. Not because it should make us stop, but it should make us think this has to be replaced. This is not a humane way to do things.
It seems like large-scale child trafficking and rape, as it comes to light, will be this is where we draw the line as a people, and let's hope. Let's hope so. Thank you. Thank you very much.